This is Cameron Mayhill and Dr. Ryan Sikes joining us to talk about Psalm 4. You just finished up exegeting Psalm 4 and being the leader of that project. And so tell me about the process. Tell me when did you guys get started and how long did it take and what all went into this? I don't sit in your seat, so I'm curious to see how it went.
Yeah, well, in one sense, it started whenever the project started. I think when was that, like 2020 or 2021, we started working on Psalms 1 through 6 as kind of pilot. And so Psalm 4 was in there. So I've been thinking about Psalm 4 for 5 years now. And so we did initial work on it. And I think we did good work on it. And what we did this year was revise it because our methods had changed substantially. Psalm 4 was one of the first ones we did. We were still figuring out what we were doing. And, that was most of our work for the first year, really, was developing a method, you know, developing the recipe for how we're gonna cook this stuff. And so, so there was a lot that needed to be revised. And so I had the opportunity, yeah, this year to come back to it and spend a quarter with it. So like 12, 13 weeks revisiting it. And most of the Psalms that we revised, I revised 1 and 2 early this year, and then 3 and 4 in quarter two. 1 and 2, the revisions were minor. It was just kind of bringing things up to the current standards. 3 was minor, bringing things up to current standards. 4 was it got a it was completely changed the way we were reading it.
Wow, that's interesting. So tell me, so tell me about that. What happened? What was most intriguing, fascinating about working on Psalm 4 this time around?
Yeah, what changed, I think, was our method had become more rigorous, especially at the front end. So over time, we've come to, you can't, our goal for this project and our analyses of these Psalms has been to really bring the poetic beauty of the Psalms to light, right? And so we want to look at the poetry, the way it's structured. We want to look at the cool poetic features that the psalmists are weaving into these poems. But in order to do that, you have to start from the ground up because you have to know what the words mean. You have to know what the grammatical structures are. What's the subject? What's the object? You have to know where, when you're reading the text, where the pauses are. These they're not punctuated, so we have to, figure out, well, where do you pause? How do you divide the sense units? And sometimes you have to figure out, well, what does the text even say? Because the Psalms were transmitted for thousands of years, more than 1,000 years by hand. And so as when you copy something by hand, mistakes enter. And so sometimes our manuscripts of the Psalms don't agree. And so you have to figure out, well, which text is the right text that we should be interpreting and translating. So anyways, this new time around, what was different is we paid more attention to those kind of ground level details, right? So we instead of jumping to how is this poem structured and what's the message of the poem, we spent a lot more time at the level of, okay, what is the right text to be read here? And how do the words fit together? What do the words mean? And it was at the level of text that some of the biggest differences with our past analysis and our present analysis came to light. Um, in our first analysis, years ago, we just kind of defaulted to the what's become the traditional Hebrew text. Um, Whereas in this new analysis, we were more open to considering alternative readings that had been transmitted. So if you've heard of the Septuagint,
Yep.
So the Septuagint is our earliest witness to the text of Psalms, second or maybe third century BC. So, 200 years before Christ. And the Septuagint in Psalm, for the most part, the Septuagint Psalter is very close to our traditional Hebrew text. But for Psalm 4, there were a couple of differences that significantly affected meaning. In our first analysis, we didn't pay much attention to those. We just followed the what's become the traditional interpretation. But this time around, we paid attention to some of those differences, and it paid off because I think that the Septuagint helps us to read the psalm better. It helps us to get closer to what it would have looked like when David wrote it.
So do you have some examples
Yeah,
that you can share?
yeah. You want me to share my, can I share my screen?
Yeah, do it.
Let's see. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go. This is the outdated. Uh,
Sure.
I'll show you our exegetical issues. So for every psalm, we identify the three toughest problems that if you're translating the psalm, you're going to have to deal with. These are the kinds of problems that come up in the commentaries that modern translations will mention in their footnotes. So you'll see here, this is our list of exegetical issues. You've got three of them for Psalm 1, Psalm 2. We've got we work through three for every psalm. Basically, we go to the basement on these issues. We can't afford to be 100% exhaustive. We can't write a dissertation on every psalm. That would take way too long. But we can afford to go to the basement on at least three issues for each psalm. So that's what we did for Psalm 4. Every one of the issues in Psalm 4, the Septuagint helps us to get closer to the original psalm. So I'll show you one example. So, okay, here's the traditional Hebrew text, the Masoretic text. Here's how the NIV, uh, this is verse 3 of Psalm 3. In the English numbering, it's verse 2. The NIV says, "How long will you people turn my glory into shame?" So the glory into shame, that's the key phrase here. The NJB translation says, "Children of men, how long will you be heavy of heart? Why love what is vain and chase after illusions?" So very different. Whereas this one says, "My glory into shame," or you could say, "My honor into shame." The NJB has, "How long will you be heavy of heart?" So according to the NIV, if you're reading this translation, then there's a sense of, okay, the psalmist is suffering some kind of shame from these people. How long will you people turn? So these people that he's addressing are dishonoring him in some way. They're turning his glory into shame. And that really shapes how you read the whole psalm because now okay, this is the main problem in the psalm. The psalmist is being dishonored by these people, and now he's addressing them and he's rebuking them. And so the tension in the psalm, this is the clearest indication of it. His glory is being turned to shame. He's being dishonored. But then the NJB doesn't say anything about that. Doesn't say anything about glory or honor or shame. Instead, he's accusing these people, children of men, how long will you be heavy of heart? Why love what is vain and chase after illusion? So according to this translation, he's accusing the people of being heavy-hearted. That's a Hebrew idiom for being stubborn. It's the same thing you see in Exodus when Pharaoh hardens his heart and refuses to let the people go. That's the same idea here. How long will you be hard-hearted? How long will you be stubborn? Why love what is vain and chase after illusions? And that's probably a reference to false gods, like the NIV makes clear. How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? So, in other words, how long will you stubbornly worship idols and chase these false gods? So, really different, two really different ways of reading the psalm, reading this verse and reading the psalm as a whole. This one, my glory into shame, is based on the traditional Hebrew text. That's what the NIV and most translations are following, most modern translations. Heavy of heart, this is the reading of the Septuagint.
Hmm.
And so you can see the Hebrew letters here. This is the traditional Hebrew text. It's kavodi lichlima, and in Hebrew, this is what the Septuagint would look like. Kivdei lev lama. They look very similar. So even though it's radically different, my glory into shame, heavy of heart, why? They look very similar. And so it's easy to see how early on when the text was being copied, one of these was original, and then a scribe accidentally misread it and wrote the wrong thing down. So our job is to figure out, well, which one's original and which one is the mistake. And these are our argument maps where we weigh the arguments, the pros and cons of each position. We try to take account for the all of the evidence, account for what scholars have said over the centuries on this issue, and then come to our own conclusion. And we concluded that both readings have solid textual support, but the reading of the Septuagint, the heavy of heart, is a better fit overall. And so yeah, and it was that. It sounds like it's like, okay, this is so detailed. Does it really? We're talking about, the difference of one letter and a couple of spaces, but it changed the way we read the psalm as a whole. Like the message of the psalm changes as a result ultimately from this decision. And so it's really, if there's any lesson to be learned from Psalm 4 and our work on it, it's that the details matter. And you really have to pay attention to the smallest details because they could end up having a huge impact on interpretation.
Wow, that's pretty awesome all the way around. And thanks for showing the new resource site that some want to check out. So that's fun as well. But yeah, that's just amazing to see the difference in some the change in our methodology, but also just to see the change in the Psalms. I know that in the reading of the Psalms, I know speaking with my wife, you pull up different English translations of of every single translation from NIV to ESV to NLT, and every single psalm reads differently. And so I think that that's one of the things for me that I just love about the depth of the exegetical work of our team is the fact that we get to a point where we are able to analyze and get down to the details of being able to help people see the true meaning of the Psalms that oftentimes gets missed because of the poetic features or the exegetical issues that oftentimes that we just the translations skim by because they're just whether it's the text that they're using or the process that they're using, the methodology. So it's been exciting to see that, but also to be able to see how that will help Bible translators from around the world because you look at those two different things between shame and a heavy heart, and that's just a huge in the cultural context of around the world in different cultures. So
Yeah. And I can show you real quick too how this ties into poetics and
yeah,
how
that would be awesome.
I'll share my screen again. So, and just to be clear too, we don't really, at least I don't relish, disagreeing with all the modern translations. Like I think these translations you mentioned are really good translations. And we agree with them, essentially in their basic interpretation of the text, and uh, we agree with them probably most of the time on the core issues. But there are some times where I think they haven't considered, like a lot of translations don't even have footnotes on the issue that we just looked at. They just kind of gloss over the problem. But yeah, here's how if I could find it. Yeah, here's how it one of the payoffs, I guess, for reading the text like we are with the so there's the word in verse 3, heavy-hearted, mortal humans, or you people, how long will you be heavy-hearted? Why would you love what is worthless, seek what is false? So this is our poetic features layer. So just like for every psalm, we identify the three exegetical issues, so the three tough problems that you need to work through to understand the psalm. We also tried to identify what we think are the top three poetic features. So these are is basically like the coolest things in the psalm. Um, when you're looking at the psalm at a high level, like thinking about how it works as a poem, what's going on here. So like the first poetic feature, you see how the psalmist uses he repeats different words. So verse 6, for example, uses these words, sacrifice, right sacrifices, and trust in the Lord. That's like the heart of his message to these people he's addressing. Sacrifice right, turn from your idols and sacrifice right sacrifices, and put your trust in the Lord. And you can see how central this message is because the words that he uses for right and for trust, those words are repeated in the first line and the last line of the psalm. So you can see right, right, and then we use different English words for trust and securely, but in Hebrew it's the same word, or it's the same root. And so, and then we look at other repetitions of words. So poetic features is where we look at, yeah, what makes this psalm special poetically, and then how do those poetics contribute to the message? And so that's what we talk about here. But anyway, back to the heavy of heart. It actually has it's part of a pretty cool poetic feature. So the phrase heavy of heart, this this word heavy or make heavy or harden, and the word heart only occurs a few times in the Bible. And it's always associated with the plague story in Exodus. If you tell anyone, who knows the Bible well, talk about hardening your heart, they're going to think of Pharaoh, right? That's right. That's whenever these words are used, heavy or harden and heart, in the Bible, it always refers to Pharaoh. So I think I've got a list of verses here: Exodus 7:14, 8:11, 9:7, 34. These every time, and then the one time in First Samuel, the Philistines say, "Don't be like Pharaoh and the Egyptians who hardened their hearts." So the phrase is almost always associated with Pharaoh and the Egyptians and the plagues. So basically, what he's saying is, mortal humans, how long will you be like Pharaoh and the Egyptians? How long are you going to harden your hearts and refuse to acknowledge that the Lord is the one true God? Now, here's where the poetics come into play. Because in the next verse, he says, "But know that the Lord has set apart one who is loyal to him. The Lord hears when I call out to him." The word set apart, in Hebrew, it's the word hiflah, highlighted here. It is also a rare word that only occurs in the Exodus plague story. And so you remember, like in Exodus, where the Lord says, "I'm going to send a plague on Egypt, but I'm going to set apart the land of Goshen. I'm going to set apart my people Israel, and so the plague won't strike them." Um, and so he uses the same word here. And so when you combine these two, so you have heavy hearted here, and then you have set apart here. These are both rare expressions that only occur in the plague story, they're at least uniquely associated with the plague story. It becomes clear that the poet wants you to think about the Exodus plague story. And he's saying, how long you people are acting like the stupid Pharaoh who kept hardening his heart and stubbornly refused to let God's people go. We, God's people, have been set apart in a special way. And so he's calling on them to repent and trust in the Lord. And then there's even a verse here in verse 7 where they say, "Lift up the light of your face as a banner over us, Lord." And I think that's all the light, this image of light over Israel. That's not over the others is also from the Exodus story, from the plague story, where there was darkness over Egypt, but there was light over Israel. And so, in other words, the point is, whenever you read heavy-hearted, it now all of a sudden the Psalms flooded with this imagery of you're being brought back to Exodus and the plagues, and none of that really happens if you don't read the heavy-hearted reading. So it's an example of not only does it affect the meaning of the psalm, but the poetics and like where your mind goes when you read the psalm. You're taken back to Exodus and the plagues and that. So just an example of how paying attention to textual criticism and reading the right text is can have big payoffs at the end, you know.
Wow, that's just awesome. I have a confession to make. I was reading Psalm 4 this morning just to prep for this conversation, and I didn't get any of it, right? You don't really go there and just naturally when you're reading the Psalms. So it takes on this for me just sitting here having this conversation. It takes on this whole other meaning for me to look at Psalm 4 now, which is just beautiful.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the Psalter begins by pronouncing a blessing on the person who meditates on God's instruction day and night. You know, these texts, all of Scripture, the Psalms in particular, you can't just read through them once and you get it. You know, they're meant to be meditated on day and night. And so they're because they're so unbelievably deep, you know.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. Um, yeah, day and night. And yeah, it's yeah, I always stand in awe of our exegetical team and what you guys are doing when it comes to going into the depth of what the beauty of what God's doing through the Psalter, and it's just fun to hear, especially the kind of the change with the methodology, but then also just the depth of what comes out of it. And so it's just I'm thankful for you guys and what you guys are doing. So what would you share or what would you say to partners that who've made all this possible? You know, we have partners, financial donors, and others, prayer partners. What you know, just from the standpoint of we get this opportunity to do this amazing work, and just what does that mean to you, and what would you say to them?
And well, just a huge thank you. Like none of this is possible without donors. Um, and I would say, you know, God knows, I don't know, but the impacts of our work here and some of the points in which we've been able to, I think, improve on traditional interpretations could have could have effects that last a long time. I mean, if the results of our study here, you know, could impact translations all over the world, and they could impact even major language translations as they revise. And so yeah, none of that's possible without y'all's support. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, it's just amazing to have, for me, it's a team approach where, we all have the roles that God has given us, and some of those are people who are generous and the resources, and it's just fun to see. Um, for me, being a part of Scripture, it's fun being able to share uh, how God has worked through every facet, whether it's the exegesis of Psalm 4 or the workshops in West Africa. And so it's been neat to see that. But Ryan, thanks so much for your time and blessings.
Hey, thank you.